Digital 410 Media proudly presents the What's the Scuttlebutt Podcast with your hosts, Don Abernathy, Jeff Copsetta, and Dennis Blocker.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the What's the Scuttlebutt Podcast, your favorite World War II based podcast, and we're back here with another exciting episode. Dennis is here with us as well. Tonight, I'd like to introduce our guest, Lieutenant Tim Scherrer, retired as a historian, author, educator, and a retired U.S. Army military intelligence officer, a native of Quincy, Illinois. Scherrer earned both his bachelor's and master's degree in history from Truman State University, where he was also a distinguished military cadet in the Army ROTC program. Scherrer served 28 years in the U.S. Army Reserve, retiring as lieutenant colonel. During his military career, he served as military intelligence, including as an intelligence briefer to the Commander-in-Chief of U.S. Transportation Command during Operation Desert Storm. He later taught at the Army Reserve Command and General Staff College before retiring in military service in 2015. Tim, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
And I just want to say right off the bat, I love the topic of your book that you're here to promote. We've discussed quite a bit here. When it comes to World War II content, a lot of it's done and done and done again. And one of the things we like to do is find content that people don't talk about a lot. We've done stories about something's minute as canteens, and the recreation of the jungle sweater that the fellows had Bronson do. And you have a great home front story, which is very interesting because it actually takes place before we're technically actively in the war, which we'll get to, but it kind of makes me question, well, somebody in intelligence saw what was coming in the wind and wanted to get a jump on it. But for the sake of our audience, with the exception of the bio I read, give us a brief rundown of you, including your reenacting history.
Yeah, well, I actually started going to the Weldon Spring site in the fall of 1983, and it's the birthplace of World War II reenacting in the United States. First event was in 1975, so I was actually out there with the original guys who started the hobby. Fred Poddick, Kerry Johns, folks like that, Del Miller, things like that. So, and generally they held 3 events out there, and at the Army Reserve training site there. And I actually celebrated my 21st birthday out there. Yeah.
I see.
And my birthday was on Thursday, and then we had an Eastern Front event that weekend, so I was actually out there, and we celebrated on Saturday night out there. But and then I joined an Army Reserve unit, the 45th MI, and we used to go out there and train. And then I noticed over the time that eventually areas that we had stayed in were eventually fenced off and said they were contaminated and we couldn't stay there anymore. So that was kind of like the handwriting on the wall. And eventually it was closed down, and I went on to some other assignments where I didn't train actually out there. And then me and a couple guys brought back Weldon Spring as a tactical site with the Weldon Krieg event, which we ran from 2014 to 2019. Now, in the process of that, bringing that event back, 88 millimeter Productions and Chris Grega made a documentary called Weldon Krieg. And we had worked with Chris on the mediocre World War II movie Rhineland. Sorry, Chris, but it's real. And so in that, it actually told the story of the 3 villages that were wiped out. And I had no idea any of that had happened. And in some cases, like the village of Howell, I know exactly where, like, Francis Howell High School was. I had no idea it was even there for, years. But I know exactly the location of Howell, and there's nothing there. So it was really a bit shocking and surprising. So I had written 3 books in 3 years. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to take 2026 off. I'm just going to, chill for a year. And then I ran into this website called the TNT Story. It's put together by a retired English teacher from Francis Howell High School. And Francis Howell High School is going to be, part of the story pretty significantly. Where he goes through and he documents this entire story about what happened to the people there and the 3 villages. And I saw this, and there was a scrapbook in there that had 120 pages of newspaper articles that were scanned and textualized. And I'm like, it's right there. I read the 120 pages. I'm like, well, there's the thesis and there's the sources. And I'm like, this is like shooting fish in a barrel for me. And I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted to say in the book. So it came together really, really quickly. Now, some of you may have seen some video from the site with the History Underground, J.D. Hewitt. He was actually out there a couple of years ago, and he shot the museum and he shot some of the bunkers that still exist up there. But and I actually had never been to the museum or actually seen the bunkers or a lot of the areas except for the training area until, since other than those, I didn't know anything about it. So it was a real fun journey and interesting journey for me, and also a really good historical project for me. So let me go ahead and go to my slides. So let me see. Is this working?
You're good.
Okay. So there's the cover of my book. The book is titled Do Our Part, The Tragic Tale of the Weldon Spring Ordnance Works. The title comes from the last book that was written on this was in 1978. And the book was by Donald Muschaney, whose family was involved with this. And it's called The Rape of Hamburgen House. So you can kind of guess what his perspective is on this.
Yeah.
But in there, he quotes his dad's reaction when he received the letter from the Department of War saying that they were going to build the ordnance works there. And he said, well, I guess if the government needs this, I'll do my part. And so what I did is I expanded that to our part to include, not just him, but all the other people, as well as all the workers that were involved with it. So, and it's very much a tragic tale of what occurred there. So, and just for the record, a TNT plant doesn't look like the cover photo. That's just more of a marketing thing. TNT plants are really unsexy. The buildings are, 500 feet, 1,000 feet apart, 2-story buildings, look more like shacks than anything else. There really isn't a whole lot that was photogenic about it. So again, this is just a marketing tool that I had. And there's a QR code if you're interested in it. You can get it from my publisher, lulu.com, and I have it on eBay as well. So,
it makes sense that you say that these buildings were spread far apart, because looking into this briefly, I saw that there was 3 townships. And my first question is 3 townships worth of property. How big was this plant? And now that you mentioned the fact, you had so many buildings, obviously due to explosion prevention or explosion isolation. Was it true this compound was roughly 17,232 acres?
Yeah, it was massive. It was a huge area, and over 1,000 buildings, 13 miles of rail lines were built. It was huge. It had 18 production lines and produced roughly 1 million pounds of TNT and DNT a day. And it could have produced 1 million pounds of TNT alone and 250,000 pounds of DNT a day. And then, of course, they would combine that and make smokeless powder out of it. But yeah, it was a massive operation. And if you think that, you're shipping out 1 million pounds a day, you're shipping in probably 1.5 million pounds of stuff a day. So it was very much a big thing when it was going on. So this is just kind of a summary slide. We're going to talk about the TNT plant. And 727 people were forced to leave their land. And this all happens in October of 1940. And you would have asked those people about, Pearl Harbor. They would have said, who is she? They would have had no idea what Pearl Harbor is. They probably thought it was a woman. And there's a school district that actually gets kind of decimated in the process. And that's part of the story. And then halfway through paying for the land, the Army ends up reneging on the land contracts, and a bunch of the people end up really getting screwed, getting about 30 to 40% of their contract prices. And it actually goes to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1944.
This almost sounds like people's nightmare of eminent domain coming to reality. Growing up in the 70s and 80s, you heard a lot about eminent domain, especially I'm from Kentucky and Ohio, and a lot of our relatives who live in rural areas, they would always constantly be concerned that the state or the city is going to come take their land so they can run a freeway or something that benefits the city and or state over them. And that growing up, I always heard that word eminent domain. And it seems like this is kind of like one of the first big cases of that.
Yeah, they actually used the term condemnation. That was what was in all the primary source documents. But yeah, that's basically it. And although they started with the government started with the best of intentions and ended up being the worst of execution. So there's really three different intertwined stories here. The first one is of the people and the court cases and what happens to them and how they leave their land and how this whole land purchase goes awry. The second part of this story is the plan itself. And the third part of the story is really what happens to the school district that goes through some incredibly difficult situations. And if there is a hero of the book, it's the superintendent of schools for the Francis House School District, Fred Hollenbach. So, okay, so where is Weldon Spring? And again, there's only one, and I've actually been to the spring. It's actually a rather unimpressive site right now. It used to be kind of a thing, and it's kind of overgrown right now. So it's located in eastern Missouri, and that map in the lower right shows you where St. Louis is located. Now, Chesterfield is located right across the river from St. Charles County there. And that curvy line below the colored section, that's the Missouri River. So that's the southern boundary of St. Charles County. And on the eastern boundary of St. Charles County is the Mississippi River. So the confluence of those two rivers are located just there to the right near that red section. And then I've circled exactly where Weldon Spring, where all this takes place. And you can kind of see on the map there where the village of Weldon Spring was located, Chesterfield, St. Louis County. Weldon Spring Ordnance Works is kind of there to the left. And the bridge there is an important player in this because that's one of the things that facilitates all of this occurring. So just a little bit of short history. The three communities that were involved were Howell, Hamburg, and Toonerville. Really, the original one was Hamburg, which was founded in the 1830s by Germans. And it was located down on the river. And eventually they figured out, wow, if we build right on the river, it floods. So they actually moved most of the homes up onto the bluffs a little bit higher. But the railroad came through in 1894. And it was a little bit of, a raucous village in that they had a dance hall. They had what they called the confectionery, which I'm pretty sure they sold other things out the back door during the Depression.
No.
And the more respectable village would be Howell, which was a little bit further inland. And it was originally named Mechanicsville, and it was named after Francis Howell, and that's a name that's significant in this area because the school district still carries its name. It's one of the few school districts in the country that actually carries a person's name. Although it wasn't always named that. That name changed after World War II. But and then the third village involved is one called Toonerville, and it was actually nicknamed after a sign that hung on that station that's there in the lower right corner. And it looked like the 1930s cartoon, the Toonerville Kids. So it was just kind of a name that stuck. And this really shows how names of towns in Missouri existed. And sometimes it was a family name, sometimes it was a name from different European communities that stuck. We have a Versailles, Missouri. It isn't Versailles, it's Versailles. And then Toonerville is just, an odd name that stuck. Missouri has a peculiar Missouri. Also, it's sort of the same thing, just something just stuck, and that's what they went with. So, and this is a map that shows them. You can see Highway 61, the dark line that kind of runs from the top middle over to the far right. That's Highway 61, which is today Highway 40 and I-64. And you see the village of Weldon Spring, which is really on the east side of Weldon Spring. Now, if you continue down, now you see Highway 94, which runs through this. You can see that the red dot is where the Weldon Spring itself actually is. But so Highway 94 is a key player in here. And actually, if you continue to the right, on Highway 94, you'll end up in St. Charles, Missouri. If you go north on 61, you'll end up in Wentzville, Missouri. But you can see the three villages. Toonerville was mostly just a road intersection with a few items there, a few things that have kind of popped up. Hamburg was down by the river. You can see the MKT railroad tracks. See Kansas and Texas there. And then Howell is in the upper left there. Okay, some of the key events that happened, if you would have asked the people that lived in these communities, what's going to come forward from the 1940s, they're probably going to say, that bridge that was built is probably going to bring some more people out here, and there may be some bigger estates and some camps and things, but they had no idea what was coming their way. So the Daniel Boone Bridge for Highway 61 gives an immediate passage into St. Charles County. So I was in downtown St. Louis last Wednesday night, and I made it out to Weldon Spring in about 35 minutes using that. Now, if before that bridge, you'd have to go up to St. Charles and then down some gravel roads. And it would take you probably an hour and a half to get down there. So it really changes the accessibility of this. Now, Consolidated School District number 2, which is known today as the Francis Howell District, is in the middle of making a lot of changes. And there's a 30-year-old superintendent named Fred Hollenbeck. He's the superintendent. And this is the era where they're trying to modernize schools by going from one-room schoolhouses into centralized buildings. And the key to doing all that would be having transportation, because one-room schoolhouses were always in walking distance for people. So if you're going to a centralized school, you're going to need to get the students there. Now, Francis Howell High School was centralized, but all the other schools in the district were one-room schoolhouses, although on the lower right, you can see the Miller Grammar School, which was getting ready to open for the fall of 1941. So it was actually already nearly completed for construction. And the other thing that you're going to find out that was happening in this area is more wealthy people were starting to build estates out there. The Kraut, Kraut house that's shown there on the left. That was a wealthy superintendent of a shoe factory, and the largest business in St. Louis during this time frame was shoe manufacturing, by the way. There was a boys' summer camp, and hunting cabins were starting to pop up. By the way, that house there was actually generally used by the Ordnance Works commander, the military officer, to live. So larger picture stuff, the haphazard way that World War I came about in terms of the industrial mobilization. Again, these are wars of GDP, come as you are. You've got to have plants. You got to have ability to make these things. So the Army Industrial College was founded in 1924 to study these problems. And they were graduating about 40 to 50 officers a year. General Eisenhower, after he helped clear out the bonus marchers with General MacArthur, actually, then his next assignment was to go to the Army Industrial College to study how to mobilize for war. And so they really had two different approaches. One would be conversion of existing industries. Again, I list the Rockola Company, which is a jukebox company making 4.1% of M1 carbines. And there's also the construction of new plants, and that's where Weldon comes into play. So they created, they desired a 60 plus plants for munitions. Some would produce powder, some would produce metal, some would actually construct the final explosives together. In fact, they had so many plants under construction, some of them just never opened. They just never got to the point that they were finished and opened. So and also you need all these precursor chemicals and things for the items that you're going to build. In this case, you need toluene and nitric acid, the two main ingredients for TNT. And generally that's going to be shipped in rail tanker cars. And you also need the infrastructure to connect all those facilities.
And those materials they're available domestically. We didn't have to worry about cutoffs from imports.
No, the toluene generally is an oil product. It smells a lot like kerosene. And the biggest producer of that was actually in Texas, and the Missouri, Kansas, Texas Railroad had lots of good connections down there. And nitric acid was also produced domestically. So this wasn't really an issue at all for producing all this. So what does it take to make TNT? Well, it takes, number one, you got to have lots and lots of water, because you're mixing chemicals and then you're washing them to purify them. And then you go to a next purification step and then you wash it. And then, so it takes a ton of water coming in and then also coming out. You need lots and lots of land. just because it needs to be all spread out. And you can see there's one of the production buildings there on the lower right. Again, that would have looked so great on my cover, but it looks like
Low resolution.
Yeah, tin roof rusted.
Yeah.
So, one thing I want to point out, since it's so clear in this picture, you can see there's stairs on the side. A lot of these buildings were big vats on the first story, and then the worker level was on the upper floors, and you can see these chutes that are all on the side. Those are escape chutes.
Similar to the beginning of Dazed and Confused when they're going down the fire escape to get out of the school.
Yeah. So if things go right, this is their risk mitigation plan is you step out the door, you ride the chute, and then you run like hell. Quick. And also in front of there, you can see the tram system. So a lot of the chemicals were transported in big vats on this overhead tram system. A lot of the pipes in a TNT plant are made of wood because metal, it will eat them all up. And they're actually in the museum. Some of the pipes are preserved down there. So, okay. So you need lots and lots of land. You need access to a railroad because you're bringing in, tons and tons of chemicals, and you're shipping out tons and tons of TNT. And then also you need lots and lots of employers. This is a very labor intensive process, especially considering they had 18 different production lines, plus all the support people. And roughly about 60% of the people worked in production, the other half in all the different support areas, like building boxes and keeping track. It was a government-owned contractor-operated facility, 5% above cost, so they had to know exactly what that cost was. Let's see, and then good railroad network, and really the Daniel Boone Bridge was one of their undoings because that really helped with it. And there was also a perception that the land was cheap out there, and that comes from the era when they actually built the bridge. And they cited some of the prices they got for land, but that was in 1936, and that was also during the time before the bridge was there, and there was less access. So why did they choose this exact area? Well, there's a MKT railroad rep by the name of J.D. Kerr. He appears in the story twice, 1940 and 1945. So he really wanted to develop this area. He thought it'd be good to put a large industry out there, and he thought based upon the Highway 40/61 prices, he thought they could get land out there for $50 an acre. And then the St. Louis, St. Charles community businesses, the Chamber of Commerce, organizations like that were always trying to develop plants and things like that. So that was another part of it. And then the Ordnance Department, at this point in time had 104 plant projects and land acquisitions going in the fall of 41. That's one of the reasons why this all goes off the rails.
Well, and let's keep in mind, this is right on the heels of the Great Depression. And if you're a city council trying to sell an idea on your citizens about land development, jobs to a ton of people who had a hard time finding one for the last 10 years, probably makes that pill go down a little bit smoother.
Yeah. And these are not just jobs. These are well-paying jobs. And there were actually mobs of people who showed up like during the construction trying to get jobs, and they created traffic jams and things like that, like when all this was just getting underway. So this ends up getting pitched to Atlas Powder Company, and then they kind of go out and check out the site in summer of 1940, and say, okay, yeah, this is going to work for us. And Atlas was a spinoff of DuPont. Several different explosives companies and chemical companies spun off of DuPont during the Sherman antitrust era. So, and Hercules was another large company that made powder as well. So this all comes together on the 23rd of October, 1940. These are the different headlines of different things. So it's going to cost, they're estimating $15 million to build the plant, $1.8 million to get the land. And then you can just kind of see these things. Some of the St. Charles TNT plant hit snag. That's like people being skeptical this is really going to happen. And then that story that's over there on the left, the TNT Rex plans for estates. Birchie Mahaffey, he's a guy who's going to reappear later in the story, but he's actually the largest landowner in this area, but I won't get ahead of myself here. But this came out of like a bolt out of the blue. A few people knew about it, but generally no one in St. Charles County had any serious inkling that this was about to strike, and it hit like a ton of bricks. So the plan to actually build the plant itself. Now, during this time frame, the quartermaster department handles contracts, and they handle all land contracts. Now it's the Corps of Engineers, and there's a good reason why it's now handled by the Corps of Engineers, and that's because of the Weldon Spring Ordnance Works project. This is what actually causes everything to go over to the Corps of Engineers. Now, the Quartermaster Corps had engineering officers that were assigned to it to manage construction contracts. And one of them was a guy by the name of Leslie Groves. He was one of the guys that actually worked for the quartermaster department for a while early on. So, but the quartermaster real estate division is fairly small. About 40 folks are in there, and they're trying to they've got over 100 projects they're trying to do. And it's not just 100 projects. It's 100 projects of 150 land parcels that you have to acquire. So, and each of those is a separate deal that you have to work. So they tried to use different, Department of Agriculture, land acquisition folks. They tried to get people from all these different people from different agencies in the government to help, but it was just overwhelming. So they eventually decided to use local real estate agents. Fraser Brace Engineering builds the plant. It was initially going to be 6 production lines, and then it was expanded to 12 and then to 18. So, and then Fraser Brace was given about a year to complete it. Now, the Ordnance Department is really in charge of this plant, and they're the ones that are there kind of calling the shots in terms of how the plant's going to be. And they're working with Atlas, trying to figure out exactly the way that this should be built and then function. So it's really the Ordnance Department is saying what they need, and then Quartermaster Corps and their engineering officer in charge is the one that's kind of working with Fraser Brace to get it all done. So let's see here. And the plant actually is starting to produce TNT while it's still being built, at least for a couple of months. Okay, so let's meet some of the players in here. And this is the guy who really gets a raw deal. Colonel Rigby Valiant, Chief Real Estate Division. So he was in West Point class of 1902. He's an Arkansan before he goes there. And he's in the class before Douglas MacArthur. And there's a hazing scandal that hits West Point in 1900. Actually one of Rigby's classmates gets significant injuries from the hazing and ends up dying after he leaves West Point. So, and Valiant and MacArthur both testify during the investigation about this hazing scandal. And it actually makes West Point super jumpy about anything that's going on. They don't want any kind of outside scrutiny after that happens. So he becomes a quartermaster officer, and he has a bunch of different assignments in the Quartermaster Corps. And he's quite a bit of time in Asia and the Far East. And he was assigned to a place called Nagasaki, Japan. You probably have to look it up on a map to hear about it in the 1920s. But he was actually like a vice president of a U.S.-Japanese alliance group. And then he had a bunch of experience in China as well. So this was his second tour in charge of the real estate division. He had 38 years of service when all this happened. And he's a guy who's probably never going to become a general, but the Army always has places for those like senior experts who've been around doing stuff.
It never occurred to me that the Army had a real estate division. Don't know why. It makes perfect sense. They got to have property. It just never occurred to me.
Yeah. And again, it's all handled by the Corps of Engineers right now, but then it was Quartermaster Corps because quartermasters handle contracts.
I got you.
That's why it was there. So next player, R. Newton McDowell. He's a bit of an enigma. I think he's generally a good guy. He's a bit of a curmudgeon, and he's very much kind of done playing games with the government at this point. So he's a native of Marshall, Missouri, which is probably about 2/3 of the way between Kansas City and St. Louis. Bases his office out of Kansas City, and he's a Democratic Party donor, which if you're in Kansas City and you're a Democrat, that means you're part of the Pendergast machine there, which Harry Truman was known as the senator from Pendergast, at least when he first got there. Before they just assumed he was just going to be a rubber stamp for Tom Pendergast. That wasn't necessarily the case, but and so this kind of paints him in a certain way in the rest of Missouri. Now, Missouri politics during this time were very parochial, and the Pendergast regime was viewed with a lot of issues from the rest of the state, and they wanted to limit the influence of that. And that kind of comes into play here in just a second. So he started a quarry and crushed rock business in the 1920s. He had about 12 quarries throughout the state. His biggest one was in Blackwater, Missouri, but he had one in St. Charles County also. And he got a ton of work from the WPA New Deal contracts, and I actually included a letter of him bitching about those contracts and how they were handled in 1936, I think is the date of the letter. He's writing a congressman about it, but he's a controversial character. So he gets a job building the Highway 54 cutoff through Jefferson City, Missouri, and he receives a tax lien on it with some charges of corruption. Now, you have to understand that the governor of Missouri, Governor Stark, was running against Harry Truman for the Senate in 1940, and he was arguing that the Pendergast regime was corrupt, and Truman was corrupt because of it. And this was just another way to kind of stir up trouble regarding this. He ends up losing the election, but this tax lien happens in September of 1940, and the election that would be in November. So, and this lien puts McDowell in a bit of a world of hurt because he loses his line of credit with the government to get materials and things. And he actually leaves when he actually picks up the Weldon project. He leaves a single secretary in his office in Kansas City who just fends off his creditors until he gets his Weldon payday. So somehow R. Newton McDowell figures out that this Weldon project is going to go on. Understand, he's Kansas City, and this is more St. Louis based. But the contract was signed on the same day all those headlines that I posted occur. So somehow he knew this was happening way, way before them. He didn't just show up on that day and say, "Hey, I would like to buy all this land for you." So somehow my guess is he probably heard about it through one of his connections and then went to DC and worked it out. So, and his terms of the agreement are 5% of the total sale prices, really for his expenses, real estate fees, and additional 1.5% for abstracts and title work. And that's not unreasonable today. I mean, and even then it was a little bit higher. Like during the Depression, real estate fees went from like 2 to 5%. But it's not outrageous. What he was asking for was not outrageous, other than the total amount when you actually, looked at $1.8 million, $2.5 million of land that gets acquired. So he opens an office in Old Town St. Charles across from the post office. And that you can see that picture there on the lower right. That's actually a photo from the 1970s that I used AI to backdate to the World War II era. So, but I know for sure the building looks like that. Because I actually talked to a guy who remodeled it in the 90s, but he said it had like an Adobe finish and stuff on it. So the way that this is supposed to work is McDowell has about a dozen dudes who goes out and they talk to the property owners and try and get them to sign deals. And then they negotiate the land prices and prepare the paperwork. And then they send it to the Army. The Army signs off on it. And then he gets his percentage. The county collector's office want the property taxes before they pay anybody. So that's a part of it because it was near the end of the year.
Okay.
So the Army needed 18,000 acres and they estimated about $100 an acre, which is not going to be enough. Okay. The next player in this is Birchie Mahaffey, Captain Birchie Mahaffey. I love this guy. Like if you read up on this guy, he seems like a great dude. So West Point class of 1902, he was voted class president. Him and Rigby Valiant were in the Society of Born Aristocrats together. It's in the West Point yearbook. Although it was actually a tongue-in-cheek organization, they were actually making fun of the aristocrat characters like Douglas MacArthur and people like that who came in there. But so in May of 1901, he's a junior getting ready to graduate, and he becomes a member of the famous five. It was a situation, and this happens right after the hazing scandal where some people point a cannon at the superintendent's house and they freak out about it and they expel the famous five. And after this happens, after this is going down, some of the people who actually did it write a letter saying, hey, Birchie was not involved with this, but he still gets kicked out anyway. And they loved him so much that after he was kicked out, they voted for him to be the permanent class president of the class of 1902 of West Point, even though he never graduated from there. And it was in his obituary, by the way. But so he goes off, University of Michigan, becomes a civil engineer, and mostly works in the oil industries, kind of focuses on that kind of stuff. And then a law gets passed by his congressman and signed by Teddy Roosevelt that absolves the famous five, and now he can get his commission back. So that's what he does. And in 1907, he's a coastal artillery guy, but he goes to work mostly for Ordnance Branch. But he gets out in 1915 as a captain because he marries very well. He marries Laura McBride, whose father is the president of the McBride Oil Company, which Illinois was in the 1920s and 30s was the third largest producer of oil. And if you're in southern Illinois, you'll still see lots and lots of oil wells around there, and that's where it's coming from. So he married very, very well. And of course, Laura's dad is out of the business, so by the 1920s and 30s, he's running the business. So, and he actually bought 800 acres up near Hamburg as just an investment property where he's going to develop them into larger estates for people after the bridge gets built. And during the meantime, he lets them use the land for like a Catholic summer camp for boys. And his wife dies in 1932. He has 4 daughters. And he lives in Portland Place, and that probably won't ring a bell to anyone outside of St. Louis, but I can tell you something that will make it ring a bell. Remember the couple that came out of their house with the guns in St. Louis? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was like 2 doors down from where Birchie lived.
Gotcha.
So it's old school St. Louis FU money is where he lived. So, and in fact, the Chase Park Hotel, which comes into play a little bit later, is like 2 blocks from where he lives. He could actually walk there if he wanted to. So, and for those of you that are, big into beer, his daughter, Adelaide, marries a guy named Daniel Schlafly, and that's the Schlafly Beer Company out of St. Louis today. That's sort of the existing version of the Mahaffey family. And random factoid, he's buried in the same cemetery as William Tecumseh Sherman.
Wow. Oh, wow.
Which is in Calvary Cemetery in North City, St. Louis. Although if you've been to North City, St. Louis, it looks like Sherman has spent about 100 years there. It's pretty devastated up there. But okay. So this announcement happens, and a lot of the people are like, this is not real. This has to be some sort of a mistake. And a bunch of meetings occur from the residents, and so the state of Missouri sends some like agricultural department people out there and some other agency to try and help these people. But it was really too many all at once. 727 people trying to move, right? So they actually send a telegram to the Secretary of War, Stimson, like, hey, is this for real? And he writes back, yes, this is real. This is going to happen. And you need to work with Arnold McDowell. So at that point, people are like, okay, this is real and we have to deal with this. And so people actually start optioning their land. Now, the congressman of that area is Clarence Cannon. He was a congressman from 23 until 64. Wow. He dies in office. And he's generally, I'm pretty favorable of Clarence Cannon. And people in Missouri probably heard of Mark Twain Lake and Clarence Cannon Dam. That's him. That's where the name comes from. So McDowell's staff says, hey, if you need $150 an acre for your property, well, let's just add 5% on top of it and add the 1.5 abstract fees on top of that. So people look at that and they go, okay, this is okay. He's being fair. And generally he was perceived as being, a good businessman. And he had to make deals there's some stores involved, and he pays them like 2 years of profits for them to close their stores, things like that. So McDowell's making good progress. And by January of 1941, he's got all but 200 acres under contract. So the school district itself That's Fred Hollenbeck there on the left. He is all of 30 years old when
Hmm.
all this happens. So, small school, he was the math, science teacher, the superintendent, and he probably helped out in the kitchen, is my guess. So 5 of his 7 schools are going to be lost in all of this. 3 one-room schoolhouses, Francis Howe High School, and in this new grammar school that he just built. In fact, he goes over there to check on it in November of 1940 to see what's going on with the installation of the lockers. And there are guards there who say, sorry, this isn't your building anymore. This is the government's building.
Wow.
That's so crazy.
It's totally crazy. He's like, I just built this building for school kids. So he does get it back in 1947, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. So he works a deal with the Army because Francis Howe High School is smack in the middle of the area where they're going to build the plant. So he says, okay, if we can stay till the 1st of May, we can do Saturday school. Let us finish the school year. And the Army's like, okay, that's fair. So they let them do that. Now, what happens with the one-room schoolhouses is all their families are moving out and they end up combining all those schools. And I have a photo of like 22 kids that are remaining when they finally close the district. And that's K through 8, or I guess maybe 1 through 8 for 3 different schools. They had to cancel all their sports seasons. They lost their gymnasium. The people that work at the engineering building are coming over and using their cafeteria, things like that. So, and he works a deal with the land option to get $75,000 for all of his buildings, which is going to help him at least, redo the district. But he's got a lot on his plate here. So the construction starts in November. On the left, there's Francis Howe High School. And you can see that building there that the Fraser Brace folks are working out of right next to it. You can see all their cars there. That's how close they were associated with each other. So the picture on the right, you can see the plus shaped building there in the upper left. Francis Howe High School is immediately to the right. And you can see all the different engineering buildings that were thrown up around it. So, and all those buildings are put up in literally a couple months. So they have this sort of weird relationship with the engineering company between the schools, and of course they're there on Saturdays too. So, so one of the ways that they try and help clear out the people is the Muschaney brothers, who own the house store. They own the store, they own the gas station, and the funeral home. So they can kind of get you coming and going. So they organized 2 large city auctions, one in Howell on the 30th of November, one in Hamburg on the 4th of December. So people just drag their stuff to the street, and there's auctioneers walking up and down the street selling their goods right from their yards.
Was there an official time frame they had to get out?
Well, generally they talked about 45 days. Although there was some dispensation given to some people that weren't immediately in the area. But around the 1st of December, a letter in the Howell went to the people in the Howell area, which is kind of where Francis Howe High School is, say, you got to get out of here pretty quick. They let some other people stay a little bit longer, like people more down in Hamburg. And some, and some of the areas, they didn't even need to destroy all these homes. It wasn't even in the production area. But
I'm just trying to think of the logistics of 1940s. You're a regular person, your soldier property got to move. Transportation was not anywhere remotely as reliable as it is today, let alone U-Haul wasn't a thing. And even if U-Haul was a thing, there's too many people moving at the same time that all the U-Hauls would be gone. So just the amount of stuff you have to clear out in order to make that move is just insane.
And these are generational homes that have been there for, 50 years. Now, people didn't have enough stuff. They didn't need to move their flat screen and things like that. But they had farm equipment and stuff like that. But like thousands of people showed up to these auctions. And there was some rumors that all the good stuff had already been sold off. And people are selling farm animals. And that picture there on the right is, let me find the name, Bobby and Dick Delaloy walked around the town selling their pet goat. And there's actually a really great picture that was in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch that they wanted $175 for me to use. And I said, no, I'm going to use this one.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they walked around with the sign saying, buy our pet goat for $350, and they eventually sold it. Those guys actually, I actually found their obituaries. One died in like 2009, the other one like 2 or 3 years ago.
Wow.
And a lot of these people, they don't go very far. The most likely place that if you move from Hamburg, Howell, or Toonerville or Howell Prairie area, you ended up was in Weldon Spring, which is just right across the road. But they generally would go, 1 or 2 townships over. Like only one person left the state, I think. And if they moved to another county, it was usually an adjoining county.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, so there's these 2 big auctions that occur, and some people start to get notification that they've got to be out by the first week in December. So it's not a pretty story. So eventually these communities become ghost towns as people move out. So on the upper right photo and lower left photo, those are Hamburg. And you can see just those two cars on the road, and that's totally desolate. Those are like the only 2 cars you would see for a while. Lower right, that's what Howell actually looked like. The Mashanny Brothers garage is there on the right. So I believe it's it's the building there on the right. And I believe that's the store on the left. The store was also a Masonic hall. And so what ends up happening is then the Fraser Brace, if they can reuse a building, like one of the former homes became like the time clock building, or if maybe somebody needed to live in it, they didn't need it immediately, they need to tear it down, they would let the people live in it. There's a document that lists some of the surviving homes from like April 1941 and who was actually living in them. Not the original owners, of course. And their way of getting rid of the homes, generally they would torch them, or maybe they would just demolish them, just depending upon how it what was best at the time.
So literally, you did a General Sherman on the place.
Yeah, pretty much. And understand these people, once a fence goes up around this area and there's guards and Highway 94 gets cut off. So the plant entrance is right there at 61 and 94. And then the other area down towards past Hamburg gets fenced off and you can't go there. So let's say you moved to Defiance, Missouri, which is just beyond Hamburg on Highway 94. Now you got to go all the way around the plant to get into it. And there's no highway along the river either. There's actually discussion about wanting to build a road to get to the bridge, and the Army said, no, you're not doing that. So construction goes into high gear, and all these men start showing up trying to find jobs, and there's like a traffic jam. And the local sheriff's all worried about these people, where are they coming from, and who are they, and will they be women of ill repute that join them to, capture some of that fast money.
Riff-raff and undesirables.
Yeah, so the major ordnance official on it is Captain, soon to be Major, soon to be Colonel Carl Dutton, and he moves in the Kraut House, and he's actually managing a project, I believe, in Kentucky as well as Weldon. Now, Dutton is an interesting figure in that we've already mentioned the guy who actually ends up with the command, and that was Leslie Groves. But Dutton was one of the names that was initially supposed to command the Manhattan Project. And because it was delayed, he ended up with these 2 ordnance plants to build. And he ends up, after all of this, on the ordnance board. He comes back as a colonel to award the Army Navy E. And then he ends up in China, Burma, India as one of the senior officers and retires out of the 50s. So they build the railroad spur from the MKT rail line. They actually open a rock quarry because they need that much crushed rock and aggregate for the different facilities. There's a cement plant that they build. They contract with a company out of the Quad Cities that makes that. And eventually this becomes an A1A. So they A1A priority. So they work on this 24/7 until it's complete. You can see in the upper left picture, that people are working under different lights. And what's curious is the Army actually rented all the equipment to Fraser Brace. I guess the Army could get it cheaper, and then Fraser Brace just used it. So So everything's going hunky-dory, minus, 727 people get kicked off their land. But the plant destruction is going well. Families are moving out. The people are starting to get paid. McDowell's got most of the land option. He's wrapping up his business there, waiting for his payday to get out from under that lien and head back to Kansas City. And so Fred Hollenbeck, the superintendent, actually makes a master move. Like, his school district was about to go under because he lost most of his schools, almost all of his tax base. So he goes to a bunch of small one-room school districts between Weldon Spring and St. Charles and says, hey, why don't we form a new school district? And he may have already been talking to them at this point. I don't know. And all 8 districts agree. So in early January, he announces a new consolidated school district number 2, which would be located further to the east. And actually, the Francis Howell School District covers quite a bit of area, really from west of St. Charles all the way out to where the plant was located nowadays. So it's like 17,000 students right now, something like that. But so they're going to continue with the one-room schoolhouses, at least for the minute. And he's got a problem. He doesn't have a high school because he's losing this high school. But, this guy has already built a school. He knows how to build schools. He doesn't know how to open them, but he knows how to build them. So, we'll sort that out. And he's getting a payday from the Army, right?
Yeah.
So, but there's some trouble a-brewing here. So, the Edwards family that's there in the upper right, they don't immediately go and pick up their check, and they finally make it to St. Charles to get their check for their land. And they find out the check has been canceled. So in mid to late January 1941, it became very apparent that the $1.8 million figure was inadequate, and they're going to need at least another $1 million to do this. And take that number times 23 to get it into modern terms. So the land was coming in about average $156 an acre. And so there's a lot of media stories that are saying Ardu McDowell's fees are too high, trying to get them to lower their numbers. There's threats of going to condemnation. And at this point, the people are truly at the mercy of the government. They've already been kicked off their land. They can't get back to it. Their families are buried in cemeteries they can't even get to. Right now, the Army agreed to maintain the cemetery. Well, originally they're going to move all the bodies, and then they said, no, we'll just maintain the cemeteries, and then they just abandoned them. The military didn't take care of them. So all these people have moved ahead with their lives expecting a payday, but they don't know when it's going to come. And it didn't happen for about half the people. Now, 40% of the people that were in this area were renters, and they actually fared a little bit better than the property owners. But because they could just, they probably don't have as much capital to move, but when they do move, they get resettled. They're probably okay. But the landowners, about half the landowners are the ones who really get screwed in all this. Introduce Senator Bennett Champ Clark. On World War II TV, I called him a dick. I would say he's definitely a jerk, and he's a slimy politician. Now, some people said he did have some redeeming qualities, but I can't find him in this case at all. So he was in his second term. His dad was the former Speaker of the U.S. House for many years, and he was an isolationist, very much so. And anytime he had an opportunity to poke a stick in the eye of the Roosevelt regime regarding not being isolationist, he would do that. And actually, he's in the 1940s Woody Guthrie song, Mr. Charlie Lindbergh. He gets mentioned by name in there, the last name of Clark. He's one of maybe about 5 or 6 people whose names are in there mentioned besides Hitler, and Charlie Lindbergh for the American First Committee. So he stirs up the St. Louis newspapers to kind of look and see what's going on here. He starts haranguing the War Department about land values. Why did they use this guy from Kansas City? Again, Missouri politics are very parochial. He's the senator from Eastern Missouri. The senator from Western Missouri is Harry Truman. Harry Truman stays relatively quiet on this until the Truman Committee looks into this, but Truman isn't really involved with this at all. And that may have to do with that perception of being in cahoots with McDowell, with the Pendergast regime. I'm not sure, but why is this project over budget? This land is significantly overvalued, which is absolutely not true. But don't let the truth get in the way of a good political argument.
Mm-hmm.
He actually served with Truman in the 35th ID. He was a lieutenant colonel during that time, and he was the first chairman, I think, of the American Legion or the VFW, I think. Just random factoids about him. So he actually nominates Truman for president or for vice president in 1944 at the Democratic National Convention. But and they're long friends. Truman and him are old friends. But so now there's some blood in the water. So Rigby Valiant gets relieved of duties at the real estate division. 38 years of service. There's all sorts of newspaper articles and stories of that. He overpaid fees at the Weldon Spring Ordnance Works in Burlington, Iowa. And then they start digging into this relationship with Birchie Mahaffey. They were both in the West Point class of 1902. Now, they really didn't serve together anywhere. Valiant actually did work a land deal with Mahaffey for some property in Florida in like 1932 or 34, something like that. And Mahaffey did have the largest payments for the land, but he also had the best land. It was all overlooking the Missouri River. So there's just this perception, and perception is reality for those who believe it. So this guy by the name of Colonel John O'Brien takes over, and O'Brien's actually the guy who ends up moving the real estate division into the engineer corps. So, and that's something he does by the end of 1942, but we're not quite there yet. So McDowell is assumed to be corrupt, and so there's a meeting between O'Brien and McDowell in DC, and they try to get him to reduce fees, and he's like, screw you. You guys signed a contract with me. I did exactly what I was supposed to do. I hired a dozen people. I paid $20-some thousand to get a new survey map made. And now you guys are wanting me to make less. And he's also got this pressure that's going on with this tax lien. So he's like, no, you guys agreed to this. If you didn't want to agree to this, then don't agree to it. And so there's rumors in the St. Louis papers about a Department of Justice investigation that they're doing into McDowell, things like that, just creating this perception of trouble with him. And in terms of O'Brien, he is truly, I think he's coming from, I think his motives were genuine. I think he truly thought all of this, but none of this really proved to be true. Like, if there was a connection between Mahaffey and Valiant, like why didn't Mahaffey get his money? He was like everyone else. He's holding the bag for a bunch of property. Now he's very wealthy. In fact, 800 acres to Birchie Mahaffey is not a big deal because he's running an oil company.
Mm.
It's a rounding error for him, but the perception from everyone else is this is a problem, right?
Look, one thing we can all agree on is things are not getting cheaper. Life's getting more expensive. Life's getting more frustrating. And we're all worried about every little cent we spend. Right now here in Florida, for example, gas near me within 0.7 of a mile is $4 a gallon. But one of the things I've been doing to try to save money and to get money back is using the Upside app. At that same gas station right now, if I were to simply claim this deal on the Upside app, I would pay $3.88 a gallon. Not only saving 12 cents a gallon, but actually getting 12 cents a gallon cash back into my bank account by simply claiming this deal on the Upside app. Check it out. Nothing to lose, you guys. There's nothing to install that's going to give you any weird advertisements. It's a legitimate app. Go to your Google App Store, go to your iPhone App Store, download the Upside app. Do me a huge favor. Use the invite code of digital9684. That's DIGITAL 9684. And by using that promo code, you too will get additional cash back on your first fill up. How it works, you simply pull out the app, hit gas. It'll show you gas stations in the area, show the deal, you hit claim. Pump the gas, upload your receipt. Within a few days, you'll get the money back into your account. Once your account gets to the balance of $10, you can choose to send that $10 or more if you wait into your bank account, or you can choose gift cards or deals other places. Not only does Upside save you money on gas, but they now incorporate restaurants, convenience stores, and others. For example, right now, as I'm recording this, I hit restaurant. If I go to Sonic, I get 23% cash back and I only have to go 2.8 miles away. That's 23% cash back on the total balance of the food you buy from Sonic right now. Within a few days, that money will be available to you. So you have nothing to lose. Download the Upside app. Use the code DIGITAL9684. It'll help us out. It'll help you out. We all know we got to save and get money back anywhere we can. Good luck. Keep your heads up. Fill up that gas tank.
So Stimson, Secretary Stimson and O'Brien, they got together and decided it was time to start condemning property. And that's what they do. In March, they start doing this. And he works with Missouri Assistant Attorney General Blanton. They cancel all the checks and they start condemning about 12 properties a day. And people are given a 10-day appeal process. The money goes in the bank. They're getting about 30 to 40% of their contract price. And again, the Frank Edwards family, they contracted for $1,665. They received $780, all because they didn't pick up the check. Let me just read to you this section about Alton Pittman, who's in the painting there on the right there. So that painting was commissioned by his daughter, Penny Pittman. She gave me permission to use it, but he actually went by the name of Buck. So he wrote, Champ Clark this. It has me puzzled. It just don't look like our government at all to come in, put our people out, take away our schools and churches, and then refuse to pay us the agreed price for them. We're in bad shape. We can't borrow money on the land, and the banks won't recognize the options as collateral. So people were really just in a significant bind here. They floated loans for new property, and now they're not getting paid, and it was just a disaster for these people. So the Citizens Committee forms, and this is actually in the Emmanuel Church. I actually got an email tonight from the Reverend of the Emmanuel Church, and one of my friends.
Tim, was there violence?
No, there's no. Well, I mean, who are they going to fight? I mean, they could have protest.
They're just through the depression, and now you're taking the very last thing. That's wow.
Yeah, it's pretty tough.
Did banks enforce liens back then? Because what I'm thinking is, like, some of these people probably behind on taxes. What happens? This opportunity arises. They reluctantly sell out. Now they're not even getting the money they were promised. And then on top of that, if a bank were to take what money they did get in liens, or even the government on liens on back property taxes, some of these guys might be walking away with absolutely nothing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the way the whole thing was structured is that when the government, like before all of this happened, the half of the people that actually got paid, the money would actually go to the county collector, and they'd take out the taxes first, and then they would get paid. So, and of course so
a lot of people did walk away with nothing.
So the McDowell fees would also be taken out of there as well before it went to them. So, this photo is actually kind of fascinating. This was a newspaper photo that I AI enhanced. And in June, I went to the TNT reunion, which the families that got kicked off the land, they have met since the 1960s. And I showed this photo, and people started walking up to the screen because they'd only ever seen it as a newspaper photo, and they started picking out the relatives. So, and you could just look on their faces. I mean, they're all wearing their Sunday best. But that's in the Emmanuel Church, which still exists today. It's right next to the Weldon Spring, and it becomes kind of the meeting place for a lot of these things. And I mean, they even foreclosed on the kids. Consolidated School District number 2's buildings get condemned, and
wow,
they're going to give them about 40% of the value. And they never know when they're going to get paid, because school districts get paid from property taxes, and all this is all tied up. So he isn't a.
Is there? I feel like I need a Xanax.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the gentleman in the front with his arms crossed. Looks like he wants to stand up so bad, and his wife just keeps. Nope, it's not the time or place. But he looks like he's had enough.
I like the guy on the right with the hat.
Yeah, he's in a lot of places. I'm like, he's missing the propeller.
He's kind of fun. The Muschietti brothers, I believe, are sitting right behind him. The two gentlemen in the suits
Mm.
right there. There's the guy with the mustache and then the lady, and I think those are the Muschietti brothers. And they're actually the family name that's involved with the case that goes to the Supreme Court. But so anyway, this photo really resonated with the families, none of which were probably even alive back then. They'd have to be at least 86 years old. So,
Yeah.
So again, this is why I called Cham Clark a dick. So people are already off their land. Things are getting foreclosed on, and Clarence Cannon, congressman, is actually sympathetic but realistic. He's like, hey, this sucks, and he's trying to fight for the people. Champ Clark is supposed to actually go out to the Emmanuel Church and meet the people, but suddenly he has a sore throat and he just can't go. And the next thing you know, his son has an appendicitis at the University of Missouri Columbia, and now he can't attend. And there's a fire and a flood and a massive storm and a locust infestation. So, and people are waiting for him. And as I say, he gave them the Missouri Waltz. So, and eventually a bunch of people actually showed up at his hotel room the next day, but people stayed late in the night waiting for him, and he never showed up. So, and he actually cut the meeting short with the people that actually went to his hotel the next day, because he had to go back to DC, of course. So now, unfortunately for the government, they foreclosed on an attorney by the name of Sam Watson. Now, he was the city of St. Louis attorney who actually happened to be their condemnation person. So he goes to the meetings with at the Emmanuel Church, and he has a team of attorneys he's put together, and he's like, okay, if you guys want me to take this up, I will. I'll take 4% off the top if we can resolve it through threats, 7% if it goes to district court, and 10% if it goes beyond that to the Supreme Court. And of course, he's got skin in the game. His home is there on the lower left. And the TNT site has all these pictures of these properties and many times pictures of the people involved. It's actually amazing what Bob Braille did. But so, yeah, he had $10,500 contracted, and he actually got $2,560. So this guy has got skin in the game. So let me read you a section about the Orthaniel Bacon story. So Orthaniel Bacon, 82-year-old Howell, Missouri man who offers his home to the government for including the TNT plant site and later was forced off his property to live in a one-room basement, died Monday. This is 1942, summer 42. Died Monday as a result, his widow said, of grief and worry over the War Department's holding up payment of the $2,000 sale price. Mrs. Bacon said yesterday they vacated their home on the signing of the option and were paid $50 down. They paid $50 down to buy a new home. When the government checks were not forthcoming, she declared they had to move into a basement where he aged years in just a few short months. He was bedfast for months, Mrs. Bacon said. Many times at night, I could hear him crying from worry and disappointment. She said $40 of the $50 down payment were recovered, but most of it went to the lawyer for obtaining it. Bacon, throughout his life, was a cripple due to a knee injury and suffered when he was 2 years old. She said the $2,000 option money was paid into court pending condemnation. Pending condemnation proceedings. She asserted the price was agreeable to us and the government both, but the court wouldn't release it. TNT officials yesterday granted special permission for Bacon to be buried Thursday in Francis House Cemetery within the plant area, but decreed only relatives could attend and only after obtaining passes. An attending physician after Bacon's death said it was due to worry and infirmities. So that's what this was doing to people. And I think like 7 people died before they actually ended up getting paid. Meanwhile, up the river, plant construction is actually going pretty well. They were employing up to almost 8,700 workers. And of course, they have the rock quarry concrete plant. They're building over 1,000 buildings. And the plant size gets increased from 6 to 12 to 18 production lines, and then there's 2 D&T production lines. So it's actually going really well. Colonel Dutton is there on the right in that photo. And the engineering officer, whose name escapes me, is on the left. You see, that's one of the few pictures that actually has a military vehicle in it. There's a few pictures of like some sedans and stuff, but that's the only time I can see a tactical military vehicle, and I think it's a Chevy 10.5 that's there right behind him. Okay. So what happens to Consolidated School District number 2? So Hollenbeck has already announced that he's going to reform the district to the east, but they've not gotten their $79,000. They've been condemned on. So Fred goes to the military and says, hey, give me $50,000 now and we'll walk away. And that's what they did. He got his $50,000. So they go ahead and they finish the school year. And you can see that photo there on the left. That's Francis Howell High School. And all the kids are outside of it. Fred's in the lower left there in the suit. That's the last day of school. So they all went outside, took a photograph, got on their buses, and they left the site forever. They could not do graduation there because they didn't have a gym, and they had to do graduation at the Emmanuel Church off-site. And that was also, they said they could go to the last day of school. School was over, so they can't use the facility. So over the summer, he works a deal. He doesn't have money right now because all the money's tied up for property taxes, and he's only got this $50,000. So he goes to a local lumber yard and says, hey, can you guys spot me some lumber? I got to build a temporary school. And he gets a bunch of local laborers, and they build what they call the chicken coop, which is the building in the lower left. Those are all the same buses that you see in the upper picture, but it was a 5-room building that they built that was basically a plywood building that the school operated out of for a year. And then over the next year, he actually gets some WPA type grants and builds that building there on the right, which becomes Francis Howell High School number 3. There's actually 4 by the time he's done with all this. So, and he actually saves the Francis Howell School District, which is now the longest continuously operating school district in the country, or west of the Mississippi. So Alice begins to start the plant. So they run a school at their facility in Pennsylvania. They actually run like an academy. The lower left, you can see the guy there in the glasses. He's actually one of the managers learning how to successfully build TNT without blowing yourself up. So that for the technical hires, those are people who are they're coming from other plants, or they went through this academy. And then most of the manual laborers are just local hires. And some of the people, they're working on building the plant. And then as that work starts to slow down, they go over to Atlas and they get hired there. So Fraser Brace is complete by 1 November 42. They start producing TNT on the 11th of October 1941. They have 6 production shifts. They're making about $1 an hour. And people are coming from as far away as south of St. Louis, so 60-mile radius for employees. And they're coming in buses. They would get together and form like a little bus company, and maybe one of the workers was a driver, things like that. So,
Now, I know you said previously to Dennis' question, there's no violence, but I would have to assume there's at least a noticeable level of resentment from those people who were forced away post the checks not clearing and being in the local town, and then having all these workers come to go work at these plants that are on their properties that they basically got robbed from them.
Yeah, well, and some of those workers are the people that got kicked off the land because these are good paying jobs.
Yeah.
And, they got to do what they got to do. So if you're a farmer and you no longer have a farm, then you gotta figure it out. So on Pearl Harbor, they produced 3,500 pounds of TNT. They were just getting started. And so one of the things that they do, kind of reminds me of 9/11, is after Pearl Harbor, the highway department starts pulling security at all the major bridges in Missouri, to include the Daniel Boone Bridge, and eventually the Army takes over. And by the end of December 1941, they're like, this is dumb, and we're going to stop this. But you can see the guys in the early war helmets and Springfield bayonets, walking around there below the Daniel Boone Bridge in December of 1940, which had to be lovely. And those are cars there on the lower left coming from Chesterfield to go across the bridge that they inspected. They create in this is pretty funny actually. And O'Fallon, Missouri, which is just kind of northeast of the plant, maybe about 5 or 6 miles, does a blackout drill on the 14th of December, 1941. Now, exactly how these bombers are going to get to Weldon Spring, Missouri, which is 700 to 900 miles inland, and I'm sure their blackout drill will, if you're going to go bomb this plant, you find the confluence of the Missouri and Mississippi River, and you just go upstream and you find the bridge, and there it is, right? But they're doing their part. So there's some housing communities that get set up for the workers. Wentzville, Missouri creates what they call Oak Grove, and it's actually constructed in two different methods. They have all these Airstream trailers looking things that they bring in, temporary housing, and then there's some prefab housing that's constructed by the CIO, the labor union, and the AFL is very upset about this, so they actually go up there and start a riot with the CIO workers. And about 100 AFL guys show up, and there's about 10 or 12 CIO guys, and they run them off. And actually the Missouri governor, a different governor than the earlier one, threatens martial law in Wentzville if this continues. So these campers are a bit of a problem. These come in like 1941. And so there's a really bad cold snap early in 1943 in like February, and it goes to sub-zero, and they figure out that these campers are basically uninhabitable. Imagine that. And one of the things when they opened Oak Grove, they had like a big flag raising and a band and all this kind of stuff. And one of the things that they did, and to try and save rubbers, they sent all the wheels back to the plant.
No insulation from the ground.
So the wheels. The wheels.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the top. Yeah, and the tire. I got you. Yeah.
Yeah, they sent all the wheels, the tires, back to the plant, so they could reuse them for war austerity, and so they could use them on new ones. So then after this cold snap, these things are completely uninhabitable, and they decide they're going to ship them to Tucson. So you see that in the newspaper, but then like 2 days later, you see another story. Well, we're going to ship them to Tucson after we get wheels for them. And then like a couple of weeks later, you see that there was a caravan of Airstreams going to Tucson, and there's actually a priest in Cottleville, which is kind of between St. Charles and Weldon, that actually develops a new subdivision. He kind of puts this whole thing together. He gets a field that's owned by the bank, and he actually helps people get loans so they can build small homes in this area that's called Village of All Saints, which still exists today. In St. Charles, you can find it on a map. It's like Cottleville. You can find it on a map, though. So it becomes a city of TNT production. There's a port of entry where everyone comes in and out of. There's really only one way in and out of it, at least if you're in a vehicle. There's a headquarters building that's pretty massive. That's there on the left. They have a public safety force, 13 miles of railroad tracks. They have a hospital. And this is one of the, if you heard of the Kaiser medical system, where they would take care of the workers' medical needs. And that was both. It was really a practical concern because so many doctors and nurses were gone during the war that medical care was hard to get. So they actually set up a hospital there. And they also had housing, and they built 30 family homes. And you can see a picture of one of those on the right there. And that area right now is known as Weldon Spring Heights. So there were 6 larger homes, and then there were 24 smaller ones. And actually, a guy reached out to me last week and said, "Hey, I live in one of those homes." So when I was in St. Louis, I swung by there, and he gave me a tour of his house that was built for the plant. And these are not cheap homes. These are on like 1.5 acre lots. When you go inside the door, there's a set of stairs there. And then just below the stairs, there's that little room there where you see that window. That's a maid's quarters. And when you go into that neighborhood today, there were 30 original World War II era homes that were built, and there's maybe about 10 additional homes that are built back in there. It's like Leave It to Beaver back there. It's the most beautiful subdivision you'll ever see. And people are super nice and super friendly and stuff like that. And they bought a few of my books, so that's cool. But they have a cafeteria and they have the 18 production lines there. So their public safety force, they have initially 400 guards. And the local VFW tells them you need to hire veterans, World War I veterans, because they know how to handle weapons and follow orders. Eventually, they downsize that to about 176, but they use horse patrols. They have working dogs that are part of it. And there's only ever one enlisted soldier assigned to this, and that's an Army enlisted vet tech who takes care of the dogs and horses, and he's only there about 6 months. So their main job is to enforce the port of entry. You can see that picture in the lower left of all the buses and cars coming in. Generally, people carpooled because you could get more rationing fuel if you carpooled. And then they also had to inspect people when they went out to the production lines to make sure they weren't taking cigarettes, smoking materials, things like that. So they had multiple jobs there, as well as, enforcing the fence line. Fire department, the TNT plant, that's got to be a fun job. 31 firefighters. They had 4 apparatuses, whatever the right plural there is. And one of their main concerns were brush fires. Now, if a TNT building goes up in flames, well, you jump out the chute and you run like hell. But because these buildings were built into hillsides as much as they could, that they were more concerned about brush fires that may blow into them. So one of the problems they had as people were leaving their properties, they were clearing out all the trees for firewood. And they had to put out an order, stop cutting down the trees because we need that for camouflage purposes. So, and they actually had a pretty good water main system. If you're actually out in the Army training area, you'll be just driving down a road that seems like you're in the middle of nowhere, and there'll be a fire hydrant sitting there. So what is it like to work in a TNT plant? There's actually a really interesting video that was produced out of Canada about some people working in a TNT plant there, although it was pretty large facility and a little bit different than this one. But so it might take you 90 minutes to get to work. You get checked in through the port of entry, the gate, just like you'd find at any military installation. It may take you another 20 minutes to get to the production line where you're working. And there was actually the labor union, one of the labor unions requested that people start getting paid as soon as they got through the gate. And the plant's like, no, that's not how this works. So they had to go to changing rooms, and you can see the shower room, changing room. Those are there on the lower left. And each production line had one of those. So you go in there, they change their clothes. They would put on explosives coveralls, which are white, plain coveralls, no pockets. And then they had like 2 strips of cloth across the back, which would hold like a booklet if you wanted to carry something. But generally, you couldn't take anything with you. And they would walk out to their sites, and you could see that in that lower right, kind of what the buildings look like. And there would be maybe 2 to 4 other workers in your building, and you'd do just one task. Now, the windows had kind of a weird blue glass that filtered out all heat and natural light, so you didn't get any thermal buildup inside the buildings. And then also they had special lenses over the light bulbs in case one burst, it would not set off the whole building. So when the shift was over, you would walk back to your change house, and you're required to take a shower. You drop off your coveralls, which would then go to the laundry department to clean them. And then you would get back in your bus or your car and go back. So, and I think we already talked about the escape chutes. So the military department that was actually at a plant like this was relatively small, and generally almost all officers, in this case, there was only ever one enlisted person at the Weldon Spring Ordnance Works, and that's the vet tech guy. So they were mostly there to do contract management and quality control. Since it's government owned, the government owns the facility, so they have to take care of the facility, make sure the contractor's not abusing it. So there's a small number of uniformed officers. The commander was usually a major or lieutenant colonel, and you can see the number. I've got that chart there on the left. The biggest it got was 10 military officers, and the smallest it was for the remainder of the war was 4. So usually there's a post commander, and then they would work directly with Atlas Powder Company, and then there was a person that was an officer that was in charge of the ordnance department, which had all the civilian inspectors that check quality control. So And then they start shifting a lot of the admin roles to Atlas, like maintaining vehicles, things like that. And that's why the numbers go down. As far as the officers that were signed there, I also think a lot of those company grade officers shifted over to PO&E units. Because as divisions were spinning up in 1943, they needed guys to be in ordnance units, needed officers for those. And you can't, have 10 of them sitting around at a ordnance plant in Missouri when they could be in a company commander or a platoon leader in an ordnance repair unit. Okay, there were 2 racial issues that I did find at the plant. This guy, Earl Smith, he's a very eloquent writer. He's from Vicksburg, Mississippi. He got his undergraduate from University of Iowa in chemistry, and then he went to Howard University and got his master's in chemistry in 1941. And he goes out to the plant and tries to get hired, and they give him the runaround. And so he decides he writes a letter to FDR and Eleanor Roosevelt, and shit rolls downhill. And his letters, that whole file is just amazing. And I'll just read some of this. His letter, after he got the runaround. This I feel to be a rank injustice, a violation of the Constitution of the United States and the recent executive order which was issued from your office. Paradoxically enough, in a very conspicuous place in the administration building in Weldon Spring was a beautifully engraved copy of this order, which they have never had, have not, and have no intention of complying with. So, each of his letters are about 2 pages, and they're a delight to read. One of the AI rabbit holes I almost ran down is I wanted to see, it had an address on there for where he lived, and I looked it up, and it said that he lived in a house owned by Tommy Angelou, which was Maya Angelou, the poet's uncle. Now, Maya is from St. Louis, and Maya did grow up about 2 blocks from this address. Although Maya was already in Oakland, California. I actually was in the same room with Maya Angelou back in the 90s, although I had no idea who she was at that point. But, and I didn't feel completely confident enough that story was true, but he definitely lived in that same neighborhood where her uncle and her lived when she was there. So that photograph there on the left, I believe that's him. That's from a University of Iowa yearbook, although it would have been his senior year. And his shirt says freshman on it, which I'm not sure why, but there were only about 100 African-American students at the University of Iowa during this era. And he's the only guy named Earl Smith that was there for about 10 years. So I can't quite explain why his shirt says freshman, but I feel pretty sure that's probably him. There was another issue, and this was on, so Earl's trying to get hired on the inspector side of things, and eventually he does. And there's a document that tracks the number of African American and women employees, and you see the number 1 appear under African American in the summer of 42, and then that goes away in early 1943. So he moved on at some point. Now Robert Jones and about 16 other of his colleagues were working for Atlas Powder. They're African American men. And when the production line slowed, they were transferred over to do janitorial work in the headquarters building in the barracks. And, at least they have a job, right? But then when production picked up again, they weren't recalled back to the production area, and they actually made more money over there. So I have to say, Robert's got some kahunas. He picked up the phone and called the installation commander, which was kind of a big deal. And after the Earl Smith case, like, this thing gets handled like right away. And eventually all 16 ended up moving back to the production line relatively quickly, as soon as they could get them over there based on seniority, things like that. But, and that quote down there at the bottom is actually from the memorandum of record written by the Army lieutenant who handled this for the post commander. TNT work is very dangerous. A lot of stuff happens. Now, Weldon never had a truly catastrophic incident, but it did have some problems. Nationwide, 121 explosive workers get killed in about an 18-month window. 250 killed, are injured at different munitions plant issues. Now, Fraser Brace had one accident that killed a man. He got crushed by a crane bucket in January of 42. There's another guy who actually had some significant injuries when some culverts rolled off of a truck and injured him. There was one building that exploded in April of 42. They had some minor issues. The guys were able to use the chutes and get away. But one guy gets buried alive in a trench in 1942 and gets killed. 3 men get burned in a gasoline fire. They were cleaning a crane motor, and they all caught on fire. The one guy died. There was a pair of twins that both got burned, and they did not die. And notice the time frame for all these. This is a fairly short window. This is when the plant's like finally hitting on all cylinders, right? 2 guys, they had a some sort of a chemical vat boil over, and 2 guys died of chemical burns. And then they had lots of automobile and bus accidents. So, although they kind of get their act together shortly after that, I don't know if they fired who was in charge of safety or whatever. And, this is the Hoover Dam era where you got to break a few eggs to make an omelet. And these are probably acceptable casualties, but this could go really nasty really quick. So the plant earns 3 Army Navy E's, which you had to have 6 good months of production to get an Army Navy E. They get their first one in the fall of 1942, and Colonel Dutton comes back and he's the speaker for that. And then they get 2 additional ones. And then they also get a T, which is a Treasury Department award for the number of bonds that they buy, percentage of people that bought bonds. So in the fall of 1943, if you go in the Green Books, there's a whole story in there about the Ordnance Department is starting to think that maybe they're overproducing explosives. And so they're mostly basing it on their usage rates in the North African campaign. So they ordered 24 production lines closed, which include all 18 at Weldon Spring. So this happens in January of 1940. And they've released the production staff so they can go get other war jobs. And they start, putting it into kind of a warm closing status. They could reopen it if they need to. And there's some discussion of, sending equipment to other plants if they need to use it there. And they're leasing the land to graze cattle. And then Clarence Cannon writes a letter saying how they could reuse the site for other things. And this is like, January, February of 1944. And residents are still not paid, and we'll kind of circle back to that story in just a minute. And then after D-Day, really in May of 1944, they're like, oh crap, we need more ammunition and explosives. So they put the plant back into 24/7 production. So they have to go rehire employees, find new employees, and kind of start the whole thing over. And they're back online within a month. And actually they had some of their largest months of production during that time frame up through the fall of 1944. So who used Weldon Spring powder? A lot of people. And this is just 1 month. I just had stats for January of 44. They used it 30 and 50 cal ammo. They mixed the TNT and DNT and made smokeless powder. 20 millimeter and 37 millimeter shells. Now, none of this is getting made there. It's all getting shipped in 50-pound boxes off to other places. The DNT is in 55-gallon drums. They get shipped to other places. 105, 155 artillery, 90 and 260-pound frag bombs. 500,000, 2,000, and 12,000-pound bombs. Now, last time I presented this, I'm like, 12,000-pound bombs. That seems like a lot. But actually, there was a plant that did produce 12,000-pound bombs, but I believe that was something that was in development in 1945, and they produced them in 1946. They were used in Korea after the war. There were 12,000-pound bombs that the Brits used, and they also had a 22,000-pound bomb. It was used in Composition B and RDX, landmines, bazooka charges. They sent powder to a Navy plant that produced a lot of different ordnance, 40 millimeter and 16-inch naval shells. So I feel pretty confident that in turret number 2, next to the table of the surrender ceremony in Tokyo, there was Weldon Spring powder sitting in those shells. And my guess is that stuff probably persisted up through the 1980s and 90s. Okay. So meanwhile, in court, what happens with those people? The people get together and they file a court case using Sam Watson, the guy who lost some of his own property in this, and they it goes in the Eastern District of Missouri. Court case is filed in 42. The middle of it, again, they're trying to show that Rigby Valiant was corrupt, and the judge actually admonishes the federal prosecutors. Now, one of the things the government does is they kind of play dirty. They're trying to show that the land is overvalued. And you can see that house there in the lower left. That's one of the examples that they used for a piece of property being overvalued. Now, they also kind of left out the fact that there's a bunch of land attached to it. The Muscani family, again, they own the store and the undertaker and the garage and homes. But actually, the one that they did their test case on for the federal government, was actually some bottom land down by Hamburg where nothing was built on it. So really, the government was trying to stack the deck against the people. But it didn't work at district court. Now, it goes to the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, December 43, and actually the appeals court sides with the government. And basically they thought that the 5% fee structure was excessive. Now, something else is going on with R. Newton McDowell because he doesn't get paid like he's supposed to. He ends up dissolving his corporation in 1942. He's already laid out all this money and hired all these people, and he's not getting paid. So his company actually goes under. And I discovered that because there was a case up in Macon County, Missouri, where one of his vehicles got into a car wreck and they sued. Mm-hmm. And by the time it makes it to appeals court, the appeal is in 1943, and it's like, can you sue a defunct company for the car accident injuries? And it came back, and that's how I figured out his company had gone under by then. So the U.S. Supreme Court actually takes the case. So Muscani versus the United States is argued. It's actually bookended by the Korematsu versus United States case, which is the one about the internment camps of the Japanese folks. So that case, the internment case, is actually argued before and released after the arguments for the Weldon Spring case. So they actually side 5-3. They rebuke the government for not paying a legal contract. They don't like the terms of it. So it's argued in 45 and released in February of argued in November 44 and released in February of 1945 is when it actually comes out. So orders the paying of the residents. Now the residents are like, you need to give us interest because we have lost money over the years. And there's some charts on there that shows how much they actually lost. Just from inflation, it's about, let's see here. $32.55 out of $155, and that's based upon the inflation during the war years. Plus, then you throw in the attorney fees, the 10% and all that. They got, if they'd optioned for $155, they got $97. And you can see the interest that would have given them on the right. Those are the different interest rates that were from the Federal Reserve during that time frame. So it would have helped them some. So the government starts paying people in 1945, but immediately they go after R. Newton McDowell and put a lien on any money that he may make on it. They are after this guy from start to finish. They just do not like him for whatever reason. And he ends up getting nothing out of this. So the plant closes in August of 1945. They do a production slowdown after VE Day, and they button up everything in after VJ Day. And they've already closed the plant one time, so they know how to do this. It's not hard for them. They've already done it recently. And then Atlas is released of responsibility November 45. And they remove the fences in 1946, and people can actually get back to see their family cemeteries, things like that. So then there's lots of questions about what's going to happen to this land. And it's declared excess property in December of 45. The property owners have already been paid by this point, so there's really no question that they're going to get anything back because they're already settled with. There's one or two letters in the files about veterans who ask for their property back, but again, it just gets completely ignored. Now, R. Newton McDowell dies in 1946. And there's actually a court case that doesn't get resolved for his corporation until 1947 that I found. So I think this really just kind of broke him and definitely broke his business, but he's buried in Marshall, Missouri up there. So what do you do with a TNT plant? So this gentleman from the MKT Railroad, J.D. Kerr, he's actually given a proposal from the St. Louis Chamber of Commerce, a flashy proposal. He flies to London and presents it to the United Nations headquarters, which is looking for a place to build their new international location. Where are they going to operate the UN out of? Because at that point, it was based out of London. So he goes and proposes that they build the United Nations headquarters in Weldon Spring, Missouri. And I had Google Gemini draw that United Nations headquarters image there with the Daniel Boone Bridge behind it and the Missouri River, everything in it. And that flew like a Led Zeppelin. And they chose the clearly inferior site of New York City to build the UN headquarters, which I'm sure they still regret today. And then in 1950, the Air Force Academy was looking for a site. And there were a bunch of locations in Missouri that wanted it. So they kind of rebaked this UN headquarters proposal and then tried to get the Air Force Academy built there. Again, I used Google Gemini to put the Air Force Cadet Chapel there on the Missouri River, right by the Daniel Boone Bridge, and a F-80 shooting star flying over it, and a little satellite in the sky. But again, that did not, and they chose the clearly inferior site of Colorado Springs in 1950. And they actually used a lot of the bunkers for civil defense training that were in the northern end of the property. What was really funny is if they would have actually done this, the Francis House School District would have gotten screwed again. And I haven't covered why. That's on the next slide. So what do you do with a TNT plant? Well, the largest parcel of that gets sold off of the state of Missouri is the Augustus Busch Wildlife Area. The Busch family, Budweiser family, made a large donation, and that's the largest part of it. And they still have many storage bunkers. If you look at J.D. Hewitt's History Underground video, he's got one where he goes up and sees all those bunkers are all still there, as far as I know. A large parcel went to University of Missouri as a research farm in the southern area, and some of that got sold off to become a research, like a research park, which draws the ire of all the families even to this day. No one got any land back, by the way. The housing area becomes Weldon Spring Heights, which is sold off in an auction in 1949. And it's a very hard neighborhood to get in. Usually like maybe one home will come up for sale every couple of years. Because it's so idyllic back there. Consolidated School District Number 2 gets its Miller Elementary School back when they actually get to open it as a school. And then in 1949, the former administrator of the plant is gifted to the school district and becomes Francis Howell High School in 1950. And again, that's the former plant building there on the lower right that has now become the school. And the cafeteria for the plant was used as a cafeteria, and some of the housing areas, the barracks areas, were used as offices or maybe housing for some of the teachers, things like that. And so the area where the production area is located still has a lot of the buildings through the 50s. So they go in and they decontaminate the site by burning the buildings in place. And some of those actually blow up as part of the process. And in 1960, the Weldon Spring Army Reserve Training Center gets formed. And again, 1975, that becomes the birthplace of World War II reenacting. So, okay. And as if things are not bad enough there, they build in 1958 the Weldon Spring Uranium Feed Metal or Materials Plant. So this is built on production lines 1 and 2. And they enrich yellow cake uranium into nuclear weapons grade uranium. So this plant operates for roughly about a decade, and it literally closes overnight. and there's beakers on tables, things like that. And I remember this being there because this wasn't removed until the 90s, and it was creepy AF driving by there. There's some ponds there that are just full of stuff, and they put all this hazardous waste in barrels down at the rock quarry that they used to build the plant. Now, Mallinckrodt actually looked into the possibility of building or creating Agent Orange there in 1968, which would complete the trifecta for the site. TNT, nuclear weapons, and Agent Orange, but it was found to be too hot, so they chose not to do it. Now, the Francis House High School folks claim there's a lot of health issues that they have gained from this because the plant was not that far, maybe quarter mile, half a mile at the most from where the nuclear plant was located. So what happens to it? It gets closed for about a decade and becomes Missouri's Chernobyl. And so they collapse the weapons plant in on itself, and they actually go in the TNT area and they remove a bunch of remaining contaminants as well. And they all put it in this large 40-acre, 75-foot tall containment cell. And you can actually go on top of it. There's stairwells that you can go up there, and there's a seating area up there. And then a few years ago, they built this lovely visitor center, which has the museum in it that JD went and visited. There's some classrooms in them. They do all sorts of school programs about conservation, wildlife. They do some on the TNT era, the families, and also a lot on the nuclear era as well. So it's actually a really, really nice, and they do a lot of school stuff there. So, and in the 1960s, the family started having reunions, and I went to their reunion back in June for the TNT folks. They get together every year and rekindle their friendships of all of the things that were lost there. So it's pretty amazing after so many years that they still do this. So that's kind of the story.
That's a crazy family legacy to kind of have for these people who are having these reunions. And it's just, the whole thing is just from top to bottom, just kind of crazy. I mean, we hear all the time, the war helped end the Depression, provided jobs, and yet here people are still getting ripped off on their properties and everything else. Just, it's not surprising, but it's definitely a nice, unique look into some of the history that happened here on the home front during the time.
Yeah, and some of the crazy things about this, people are getting kicked off the land and then they're working in the TNT plant, or maybe they're going off and joining the military and have all these sort of complicated feelings about what's occurred to them and their families.
It is amazing they didn't have more fire or explosions, considering 98% of your workforce is probably 2 pack-a-day smokers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's why you had the guards.
Yeah.
There was a certain line that the guards would really shake people down. And I think people understood that, this could go horribly awry really, really quick. There were some interesting memos in the files. I got about 400 pages from National Archives on it, and there's some correspondence going back and forth between the MKT Railroad and the plant about where you can bring in steam engines, and they have to have spark arresters, and we can only have so many cars sitting. And there's some discussion about where do you build the fire department building? Do you build it too close to the rail yard or one of the production lines because it might blow up? Things like that. So there's a lot going on here.
Wasn't it just last year, the year before, that a fireworks plant in Tennessee or something blew up? One of their compounds blew up?
Texas, maybe? Something like that.
Yeah, somewhere. I just know the whole building just vanished. Like, just a footprint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, they lost one of their production buildings in April of 1942. So, but they did get that Army Navy E by fall of 42, which meant that they turned it around. I don't know if somebody got fired or their safety guy got fired. I would hope so after all of that. But they definitely turned it around. And this was consistently one of the largest producers of TNT. And that's one of the reasons why it got shut down during that time frame, because you could make the biggest impact by closing one plant.
Sure.
And keep all the other ones in operation.
Well, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast. Before we go, Tim, where can people find you? What's your socials, your websites, and all those good links and areas?
Yeah, I'm showing the a QR code. You can go there. That would be on my author's page on lulu.com. It's available there. I have it for sale on eBay, and it'll eventually go into distribution. It's just not quite there yet, but there's a soft copy, hard copy, and ebook available.
And as always, we'll have links and photos and everything available over at WTSPWorldWar2.com. This was Do Our Part, The Tragic Tale of the Weldon Spring Ordnance Works by Tim Scherrer. For myself, Dennis, and Jeff, who's not here this week, thank you guys so much, and we'll talk to you all next week.
This has been a Digital 410 production.